Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fourth webinar in this series. We've talked about mental health and the function of behavior, mental health in the body and mind, and today we are going to dive into trauma-informed practices to support youth. So that's whether you work in a school setting, in a counseling agency or organization. The information today is going to support you to ensure that your practices, your supports are trauma-informed. And again, my name is Tova Fairshot. I'm an education consultant in Washington State, and my company is Innovative Behavioral Consulting. Today, we are going to learn how trauma impacts the brain. We're going to talk about the hidden trauma of chronic stress. And then, of course, diving into and really going into understand trauma-informed approaches in the classroom or in the learning space. So first, let's talk about supporting students who are exposed to chronic stress and to trauma. And just to reiterate, I know I've said this in previous webinar sessions before, but when we talk about trauma, and when I use that word, I'm specifically talking about a response to a negative external event or a series event, which makes it impossible for the child to cope in the moment, right? They don't currently have the skills, the coping skills, to cope with the situation. And we know that trauma comes in many forms, right? It could be maltreatment, neglect, witnessing violence, or the loss of a loved one. Traumatic experiences, as we know, impact brain development and behavior inside and outside of the classroom or learning environment. And the ways that trauma or traumatic experience impact the education of children. We know that 1 in 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can affect their learning or their behavior, right? So 25% of the children that are in the classroom have been exposed to a traumatic event. We also know that the COVID-19 pandemic has increased that. So we are having more children into the classroom that are being impacted by trauma. Trauma can impact school performance, right? Lower GPA, lower attendance, decrease in reading ability, increase in behavioral issues. It can also impact memory, attention, and cognition, which we learned in the webinar series, I think 2 times before this, right? How it impacts attention. It can also interfere with those problem-solving skills, which, as we know, can result in frustration, result in anxiety for the child, which can increase that behavior. But we also know that educators can help, right? When we have children in our classroom who have been impacted by trauma, who are experiencing or may have experienced that physical or emotional distress, educators can support. As we know and what we have talked about, when children experience multiple traumas or chronic trauma, their brains actually tell themselves and their bodies to function as though the threat remains, right? They're in that prolonged alarm reaction, which means that they will spend a lot of their time in the classroom, for example, scanning that environment to look for threats. What is a possible threat? What do I have to fight or what do I have to flight from? Close attention to teacher instruction, being able to recall information, retaining those learned ideas become difficult because, and if you've seen any of my other previous webinars, the children are not in their prefrontal cortex. They are not in their thinking brain, which means that they are going to struggle academically. They're not going to be able to retain that information. It also means that there can be significant difficulty building relationships with adults and peers. Right, and so this visual to the right-hand side of your screen shows how stress can actually change a child's brain, right? The normal brain A brain not exposed to chronic stress is on the left, and then a child exposed to extreme neglect, that brain is on the right. Physiological changes happen. Neural circuits are disrupted, right? The brain's hippocampus, the brain's memory and emotional center, is impacted. Brain shrinkage can occur, right? And as we know from previous webinars, a child cannot regulate their emotions if they're living in a state of constant stress. So I'll touch base on adverse childhood experiences for a minute here. And as we know, ACEs are those potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood. Toxic stress from ACEs can change brain development and affect how the body responds to stress. And as we know, ACEs are linked to chronic health problems, to mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. So the things that we experience, those adverse childhood experience that we may have experienced or have been exposed to as children, impact us into adulthood. All right. And I want to put this visual up of the iceberg because I think the iceberg is really critical to consider in this moment. When we see a child walk into our classroom, walk into our work setting, all we are seeing is that very tip of what is going on with them, right? Their behavior. Everything under the iceberg, their trauma, is what is impacting their behavior. Oftentimes, we immediately go to support the behavior without considering what the risk factors are for that child, how they're impacted by trauma, and what do we need to do to support the entire experience that this child is having, not just the behavior. Schools play a vital role in supporting youth who are impacted by trauma, right? Schools and community-based organizations, which I know some of you that are watching this webinar are part of, they actually serve as a link to supportive services, right? And we can adapt curriculum. We can implement behavior intervention plans to meet the educational needs of students who have experienced trauma. Being in a classroom with a trauma-informed lens is good teaching practice, regardless of how many students in your classroom have been impacted by trauma. And really what we need to understand, the cycle of trauma through the school environment, right? Students we know may display problem behaviors related to past trauma, and they actually become re-traumatized through punishment through those behaviors or for those behaviors in the school setting. This means that the trauma cycle continues, right? It embeds that trauma even deeper into that youth to continue that cycle of behavioral problems rather than lessening them, right? So as you can see in the visual to your left, the cycle of trauma. The child has experienced trauma, which leads to emotional and psychological damage, which can lead to behavioral problems in the classroom, which oftentimes leads to a punishment. And then it continues. The student is re-traumatized. So this is what on the left-hand side, this triangle, this upside down triangle shows you is typical development for a child, for an adolescent, right? At the very bottom of the triangle is that survival. They learn that they can rely on others. They can trust others. They get fed by their parents. They have a roof over their head. They have shelter and security and safety. And so it's at the very bottom of this triangle, but as you can see, it's the smallest part of the triangle. When a child is typically developing, this does not have to be large because they are getting their needs met and they are not living in fight, flight, or freeze, right? They are not continuing to live through that reptilian brain that's telling them that they have to survive. From there, we have regulation. Our children typically develop next that regulation, and we have to teach that. We have to build that skill in, right? How do they self regulate? What do their coping skills look like? Part of this, right, we know is layered with that social and emotional learning. And then finally, and the majority of what we spend our time in a school setting is their cognition, right? It's really building into that prefrontal cortex, that thinking brain. We know when youth have been impacted by developmental trauma, this triangle is flipped. The largest part of the brain to develop is that survival part of the brain because our children are not thinking about whether they can thrive in a setting or not. They're thinking about how they can survive in a setting. Regulation is a huge challenge for children who are impacted by trauma, being able to self regulate. Because again, they're not thinking about how to calm themselves, how to lower their heartbeat, how to take deep breaths. Once again, they're thinking about how am I going to survive? And as you can see, as we move up the triangle, cognition is the smallest part and the last part to develop. There are so many impacts of childhood trauma, right? We know in cognition, in brain development, in behavior, in mental health, building relationships. So many children are impacted by attachment disorders, emotions, and physical health. All of these are impacted by childhood trauma. And I'll give you a minute just to look over this list. And so I want to go over this cycle a little bit more specifically. And the screen that you see in front of you is actually through this cycle. This image was created by Service Alternatives. And so I'm going to walk us through this so that we can start thinking about what does this look like in the classroom? What does this look like when we work with kids? Right. And this is another example of the trauma cycle, but a little bit more strategically put into place so we can actually see what this is looking like. So, first, a child is triggered by something in the classroom, let's say. Right. So they are already impacted by trauma. And now something in the classroom happens and they're immediately triggered. Maybe it's the teacher saying no. Maybe it's given a worksheet that they have to do and they don't know how to do it. Maybe it's a student who's picking on them. This causes an intense physical reaction. And we all know what this feels like because all of us have triggers that we have experienced, right? That intense physical reaction where our brain is telling us that we either need to fight, flight, or freeze. Our brain is telling us something is wrong. Therefore, we determine, subconsciously or not, that we need to avoid all triggers because it feels better to avoid triggers. It feels better in my body. When I avoid all triggers, I don't have any physical reaction, and that makes me feel good. If I don't have a physical reaction, I feel good about it. I start to learn that avoiding things works. But I'm not just avoiding one trigger here or there. I start to avoid all emotions, which leads me to isolation. Because again, in my head, I'm telling myself that triggers are bad. I now end up in isolation. Academically, I'm falling behind. Behaviorally, I'm falling behind. I'm not able to make friends similar to my typically developing peers. And then guess what? Another trigger happens because we are all human. We all live in the real world and triggers happen. And the cycle continues. I want to explain what this looks like through an uninformed view if I'm looking at my child in the classroom, and then through a trauma informed view. If I am uninformed about how trauma impacts the brain, I might start saying that the kid has anger management problems. I might start saying that the kid has ADHD, right? I might start saying that they are choosing to act out and disrupt the classroom. They're doing this on purpose to hurt me. They are uncontrollable. They are destructive, and they do not respond to anything, right? That is the way that I start seeing my student if I am uninformed. If I put my trauma lens on, I'll start seeing things differently, right? And I'll start seeing things in a way that I, as the teacher, I, as the educator, can impact in my classroom. On the left-hand side, the uninformed view, there's everything in that is out of my control. On the right-hand side, I am moving what is out of my control to a view and a vision that is in my control. I recognize that my student has a maladaptive response in a school setting, maybe just in a math setting, maybe just in a transition setting. I recognize that my student is seeking to get needs met with their behavior. I might have to do a little digging to determine what the function of that behavior is, but I know they're not doing it to me personally. They're doing it to get a need met. They have difficulty regulating their emotions, which means I need to teach them that skill. I need to pre-correct them with that skill because they're lacking some necessary skills. I also know that my student may have a negative view of the world. They might believe all adults cannot be trusted. And whatever the response was that I witnessed in the classroom was a trauma response. It was triggered from the child's trauma. If I stay in this uninformed mindset, my response might be a punitive consequence, a punishment to correct the behavior. Maybe send them off for an eval. Say that the kid needs special education services, right? Whereas with my trauma-informed lens on, my response is that I need to teach my child the skills to regulate their emotions. I need to provide support in the classroom to prepare my child for something that I know is going to trigger them, a new work assignment, a substitute coming in tomorrow, right? What are those things that I can do to prepare my child? You will have this PDF in the resources folder that I have created for you all under Google Drives. You will have this, but I just wanted to show you here how we start to move from a not trauma-informed or an uninformed view into trauma-informed care, right? Making sure we have that growth mindset belief. Remembering that our students need safety first, right? Looking at the whole child, not just this one snippet of behavior. Having empathy, having respect, right? All of these are trauma informed. So we're going to watch a short video from Oprah Winfrey speaking with Dr. Bruce Perry on the effects of trauma in the brain with adolescents. And they really specifically talk about relationships. So we're going to watch it from them.
A correspondent ended with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah, your story for 60 Minutes this week is about childhood trauma. And there's a lot of new science here about trauma-informed care. For anyone who's dealing with a traumatized child, what can they learn from your story?
Well, I think that this story is it is my hope that our story on trauma-informed care will not just be impactful, but will also be revolutionary. It certainly has caused a revolution in my own life. And I was struck by the story because it reminded me of my own childhood growing up in Milwaukee. It's not lost on me, the irony of being back in the same city, Milwaukee, where I grew up on welfare, poor, a lot of negative experiences, sexual abuse and all of that. What's the difference between a really bad childhood and being able to overcome that and a traumatic childhood and someone not being able to overcome that?
Really, it boils down to something pretty simple.
And the answer that Dr. Bruce Perry gives you is relationships.
If you also have opportunities to be connected to people in positive ways, that can buffer some of those effects. And as you get older,
I'd like to know more about that.
What he really means is love. He's a scientist. He's not going to use the word love, but it really is about how you are responded to, valued, trusted, and loved by those around you. So I didn't get it from the people who I felt I should have gotten it from. It can be anybody who cares enough about you to ask the question, what happened to you?
Could you trace back in your mind, it was that person who made the
I know
difference?
exactly who did it. I know exactly the moment I started to feel valued, and for me, it was school.
I wanted to be a fourth grade teacher because of Mrs. Duncan. And I haven't seen Mrs. Duncan since then, and Mrs. Duncan is here today. Mrs. Duncan!
The moment I felt the most value was in my fourth grade class when Mrs. Duncan said to me, I was the one who was chosen to lead the class and whatever it was.
So what was that like? I don't really remember. I do remember you.
I remember you were such a fluent reader.
Well,
if I had a class full of students like Oprah, I would have been floating on air.
Mrs. Duncan instilled in me this sense of believing that I mattered. And that is what every human being is looking for.
when you first heard that I had done something in life, did you know that it was me?
Yes, I kept up with you without your being aware of it.
And it was Mrs. Duncan who helped heal you?
For me, yes. It was Mrs. Duncan, and then it was my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Graham. It was school that made me feel a sense of value and connection.
You learned a lot on this story.
Oh, I learned a lot on this story. This story was life-changing for me.
Life-changing, really.
Life-changing. And people use that word rhetorically. Life-changing. It's changed the way I operate in my business, with my people, with my school. 1, 2, 3. You say that the most important question to ask of people who have gone through trauma is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you see, a church being shot up, or you see, all of the headline-making stories of people seemingly gone mad, your first thought is, what happened to that person?
Right.
Right? What has been life-changing for me is the question, what happened to you? Not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you? Which is an important question, not just for people who have been so-called traumatized, but it's the most important question you can ask of anyone. I can say that of all the stories I've ever done in my life and all of the experiences I've ever had and people I've interviewed, this story has had more impact on me than practically anything I've ever done.
It's changed the way you see everyone?
It's changed the way I see everyone. So when I have an employee who is acting out of line or who is just being a jerk, I don't think, what's wrong with that guy? What's wrong with that girl? What's wrong with that person? I think, I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened to them. I wonder what happened that caused them to behave that way. That's what this story did for me.
All right. I absolutely love this video. I think In the classroom, working with youth, especially building relationships is often overlooked. And it's the most important part of our work is building relationships with children, making them feel comfortable, making them feel safe, making them feel protected in the classroom. We know that children who have experienced trauma or experienced chronic stress might also have, or it might manifest in ways such as difficulty trusting others, social isolation, difficulty asking for help, hypersensitivity to physical contact, increased mental health needs, increased medical needs, emotional needs. Sometimes we see problems with coordination and balance, poor affect regulation, problems with academic achievement. We might see oppositional or antisocial behaviors and difficulty planning for their future. It's really difficult for a child to goal set off in their future when they're living in trauma, when they're living in chronic stress. They have goals just for how to survive in the moment, but not for their future. Chronic stress or anxiety tends to lock up the brain, making school hard for kids, right? Especially for kids who are impacted by anxiety. What we know is that anxiety disorders are among the most common mental health problems in youth. We know that the prevalence rates can be up to at least 20%. Children with internalizing disorders, and anxiety is an internalizing disorder, receive treatment much less frequently than those with externalizing disorders, right? The students who are throwing chairs across the classroom get support more frequently than the students who are going internal with anxiety, perseverating on issues, right? Because they're not showing their behavior the same way. We also know that anxiety disorders are frequently comorbid with other either anxiety or depressive disorders, and some might look like externalizing disorders. So many children who are impacted by anxiety are impacted by other disorders as well, mental health disorders. And one of the ways that anxiety manifests is avoidance of school refusal, right? Maybe not attending class, not coming to school, or leaving the classroom. This is more than just school jitters, right? And we don't want to confuse this with students or children who are impacted by truancy. But what we do know is that it often is a symptom of a deeper problem. It affects chronically anywhere between 2 to 5% of children, but up to about a third of youth refuse school at some time or another due to anxiety. The most common ages that are affected are 5 to 6 years old that transition into kindergarten, first grade, 10 to 11 years old that transition into sixth grade. And as you can see, this is repeated during times of transition. What we also know about children who have this school refusal or this avoidance, they typically are at average or above average intelligence, right? So their refusal to come to school is not impacting their intelligence. It's not because of any type of learning disability. We know that there are some behaviors that come out when children are impacted by anxiety. Avoidance maintains or worsens anxiety. When children start to avoid something, their anxiety about that situation just becomes worse. It's tempting to avoid engaging with fears, but as we know, then the student never fully experiences success over their fears, right? And it becomes a habit, right? It's just it's habitual. Anxiety does decrease over time. And that's one way that classroom teachers, support individuals, educators of youth can help children, is to remind them that anxiety does decrease over time. And it's also important to be realistic. The feared outcomes, the reason for the anxiety, oftentimes do not actually occur. But avoidance is often positively reinforced through that child's environment. If they avoid going to school, they get to stay home, maybe with a parent, maybe with a favorite book or a TV show, right? So it ends up being positively reinforced. When children are impacted by anxiety in schools, it might be less apparent, right? We might not notice it as much compared to other behavioral disabilities. Children might even appear to have that perfectionist mindset. They're the good kids, but they can perform pretty poorly in school. They have somatic complaints often, right? They complain about stomach aches, about a headache, about aching joints. Anxiety can sometimes also show up in the classroom as an oppositional behavior, right? If they're avoiding to do a task, avoiding school, it can look like they're refusing. It's oppositional. So this is going to be an opportunity for you to pause the video to reflect. Reflecting on the data and the information on chronic stress. Did anything in the data surprise you? What are some of your bigger takeaways? How are we currently thinking about and addressing chronic stress and anxiety in students at school? Is it effective right now? Is there data to support our thinking around the impact of anxiety and chronic stress? What about the data on the effectiveness of our interventions? And how are we supporting adult stress and anxiety? So pause here for as much time as you need. I am going to continue with the slideshow and come and catch up with me when you're ready. We're now going to dive into the components of trauma-informed care. And the first place we're going to start at is creating that safe environment. Predictability and having a safe environment is being trauma-informed. I just want to reiterate that. Structure and predictability is the intervention. Having a routine in your classroom, making sure children know what to expect. Connecting the classroom structures to the school structures. You don't want surprises. Surprises are not trauma-informed. Providing opportunities for open communication between students and adults and students to student. This leans into learning those social emotional learning competencies, building relationships, helping to establish communication skills. Scaffolding learning activities so students are experiencing a high rate of success. We want our children to experience and have success. In the classroom, we want a place for students to take breaks, to calm down, to remove themselves from the stress. This is not a place we want to send them to outside of the classroom. We want this space inside the classroom. And we need to make sure that all adults working in the classroom, working in the school building, are on the same page. We don't want our students to be surprised by a change in the decision-making process or by different expectations. We do not want our children to have to code switch, moving from a different setting to a different setting. So we all need to be on the same page. All of this is trauma-informed. All of this are ways you can implement being trauma-informed in your learning space right now. So this is from the Midwest PBIS organization out of 2017, but I just wanted to show how these examples of classroom practices are trauma informed. And feel free to pause on this slide to take some time to look at it for yourself, right? But if, for example, arranging orderly physical environment, what is the strategy? So what does this look like? And then the why behind it. Defining, teaching, acknowledging rules and expectations. What does that look like and why? Defining, teaching, classroom routines. What does this look like and why? And active supervision. What is the strategy in the classroom, on the field, at the playground, in the cafeteria? Why is this trauma informed? So you all have access to this on the Midwest PBIS 2017 website, and I will make sure to have this in the resource list as well for you today. Again, this is from ECHO, but thinking about what do I do, and you will have this PDF as well to take with you today. What do I do to make sure that my support for children is trauma informed? Creating that safety environment. Helping to regulate the nervous system. What works for the child, right? We want to make sure that whatever we're doing to support the regulation of the nervous system, taking deep breaths, going for walks, mindfulness is something that's going to work for the child. Building a relationship. Support the development of coherent narrative. Again, that's that predictability. Practice some power with strategies. Right? Think about that. Build social, emotional, and resiliency skills. And foster post-traumatic growth. And again, you will have access to this in my resources folder. Space to regulate, right? That would go under number 1, teaching self-regulation. Number 2, building community, consistent structure, empowers students with their voice. Develop and teach social emotional skills and support risk-taking in the classroom. Moving into the second component of trauma-informed care, supporting and teaching social and emotional regulation. We're going to watch a video on this.
What does it mean to make the world a better place?
Nice! So those are those big questions we're focusing on. For me, being trauma-informed has so much to do with mindset. Accepting that different people come into a school setting with incredibly varied life experiences. Some of those life experiences may be traumatic, and the way in which that plays out in my particular classroom could look a number of ways. And by me having that lens, it makes it less about are they doing the right thing or the wrong thing, and more about where is that behavior coming from, why is that happening.
Adverse childhood experiences like poverty, neglect, exposure to violence can bring about overwhelming stress, which can cause negative effects on the learning brain and on behavior. If children have the experience of adversity, they will have uneven development of these foundational skills like self-regulation and executive function or relationship skills. These are the children who are at risk to fall further and further behind. But the good news is that there is a powerful antidote to stress, and that is the effect of the human relationship and the presence of trust. Schools are an ideal place to produce many different kinds of relationships that are capable of buffering stress. Schools themselves can be healing places.
If you're fearful, if you're anxious, if you're distracted about something that's happened to you, you literally can't learn. Your brain shuts down. So it's essential to give kids social and emotional tools that allow students to recover from the challenges that they have experienced. Take actual classroom time to work on the building blocks of how to perceive your emotions, how to talk about them, how to get along with other people, how to take a moment and become calm when you need to, how to express your needs so that others can meet them.
When we start to understand what it takes to be responsive to the effects of trauma, we need to think about the environment, about individual services, and we need to think about the skills and mindsets of kids that won't develop as they should when they're impacted by trauma.
I do a lot of work around self-awareness and being able to name emotions and then make a choice around those.
When I get mad, I take deep breaths and that helps me get more calm.
Many of the things that we think about doing for kids who may have experienced trauma are good for everybody, and everyone will encounter some kind of adverse circumstance at some point in their life. And for some children, we're helping them deal with what's already happened in their lives. For others, we're preparing them to deal with the challenges later in their lives.
If you can hear my voice say, "We are awesome." We are awesome.
All right. So again, thinking about how we are trauma informed, we know that there are social and emotional learning skills to self-regulate. We have, and this visuals from CASEL, the Collaborative of Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. We have self-awareness. This helps us identify our emotions. How are we feeling today? Self-management. This is our impulse control. How can I gain skills to cope when I am frustrated? Social awareness. How can I take the perspective of others, of other individuals? Relationship skills. How do I communicate effectively? And then decision making. How can I solve my own problems? All of these, the development of these skills is to be a trauma-informed classroom. And we also know that studies show that mindfulness practices actually help children connect with their positive emotional and social experiences, often things that a traumatized brain struggles to do. So these practices actually stimulate the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that's linked to reflective awareness. Right? So there is a correlation between mindfulness practices and developing that prefrontal cortex. So we're going to talk about some mindfulness practices. And, you know, mindfulness is something that has been going on for centuries at this point. But when we talk about mindfulness education, what we're really talking about is the purposeful inclusion of mindfulness and meditation principles, theories, and practices within an educational setting. So the goals of mindfulness education is self-awareness, empathy, techniques to focus the mind, mindful communication, and the application of mindful skills to everyday life. So students are able to generalize these skills. We know that students do benefit from mindfulness education. They have better attention, increased academic performance, greater ability to regulate emotions, increased positive behavior in school, greater ability for empathy, increased social skills, reduction of anxiety, reduction of stress, decreased symptoms of PTSD, and lower rates and less severity of depression symptoms. When you start a mindfulness practice, there are expectations you have to begin with, right? You have to explain to the children that they have to listen all the way to the end of the question before answering. They have to listen with their whole body without reacting. They have to pay close attention to what someone else is saying, so close that they could repeat what that kid said or what you say. And they have to listen for ideas that are different, ask questions if they don't understand, And if they start to get tuned out, they have to rejoin the conversation, right? They need some tips for that. So we're going to watch another video of what this looks like in the classroom.
Deep down, I keep feeling this pain in my chest. I got kicked out of my house.
The panic attacks.
I, like many other teens, have struggled with anxiety, my social anxiety.
Really bad anxiety and depression. I used to go to school just completely exhausted every single day because I'd be up all night worrying.
I felt kind of like a ghost roaming through the halls.
The stress made me sick.
It's just a lot of repetitional thinking about like if there is a purpose to life, whether if there is any reason to continue forth or to just cut it short.
Take a second and breathe and reflect on what you feel.
Awareness to who I really am and how I matter.
Finding balance.
It really feels like a place where you can be yourself.
We can be authentic.
Feel safe.
Safe? I was like on the verge of suicide before taking the class, and my family didn't really know what else to do. I was in counseling and seeing a therapist and taking medicine. Spending the first semester in this class really helped me get past that point and not let the mental illnesses I struggle with take over my life. So class brought a lot.
Anytime I start to feel overwhelmed, drop down, I put my head down. I was like, all right, let's think. I just started breathing, and it's just really helpful. It's easy to get mad. It's not easy to get angry and then bring yourself down. Me growing up, I was always told meditation and stuff was things that priests or it was a girl thing. But then you grow up a little bit and you're like, meditation is just you taking care of yourself, and everybody should take care of themselves.
It's real stuff. It's what you need.
You learn these tips for life skills that actually bring you together and interweave with everyone else.
Being able to share.
Direct my attention and stay present.
I can break my fear.
I now know how to turn my attention to my breath, calm myself down.
I knew that I could help myself.
Observe life more.
How to speak in a way that makes people want to open up to you.
Show myself loving kindness.
Learning how to control my anger. I also learned how to, be more of a better listener.
This class means everything to me right now. It honestly feels like 50 pounds is lifted off my shoulders. I truly believe that this class has saved my life and changed it for the better.
Thinking about what the mindfulness class at my school has done for my community and my school in general, it's been groundbreaking.
I think it's just a really valuable class, and I honestly wish that it was at every high school in the U.S.
If there was a mindfulness class in every high school,
I feel like this world would be a totally different place because I feel like there'd be a lot more understanding.
And there would be a lot more respect in the world. If mindful studies was in every school in the world, we'd all become much better listeners.
Somebody says something, somebody doesn't like that, has to retaliate. But if we had mindfulness, we can learn to accept that my reality is different from yours.
I think a lot of that tension is caused by people not really knowing how to handle themselves and their feelings and emotions.
You don't have to be a politician to change the world. You can just be in a mindfulness class. That's how I feel.
I have the ability to overcome obstacles. I have the ability to achieve like never before, and I have the ability to be who I am, loving who I am, and taking that love with me and spreading it everywhere else I go.
Now, that video, as we all saw, was for high school students, but we also know what we've seen is that mindfulness works at the elementary level as well.
Deep down.
right? And this is what it can look like, right? Breathing skills, meditation, self-regulation strategies, kindness education. When we talk about breathing and mindfulness, it can go really far in the classroom, especially with younger levels as well, right? Breathing is always with us, so paying attention to it doesn't require anything extra. We breathe a lot, about 20,000 times a day, right? And what we know about breath is that when we feel panicky, there is a decrease of carbon dioxide in our blood. When we do breathing from the diaphragm, that's that big belly breathing, preschoolers are really good at it. It's a method of actually balancing the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the blood. And it only takes 4 minutes to re-regulate the system via this diaphragm breathing. So that's an amazing way to start implementing breathing through a mindfulness strategy, is this 4-minute breathing exercise. And we call it a 4x4 breathing. We focus on breathing for 4 minutes. We count to 4, so 1 count per second on the inhale. And then we count to 4 on the exhale. This breathing is through the diaphragm, right? Because we're taking that slower breath. If we can, we want to actually increase that to 8 seconds on the exhale. And then we do this 4 times or for 4 minutes. When we focus on the long exhale, it actually slows the heart rate down, which stops that fight-flight response. And here's a great visual for kiddos. I'll just show you this. You can find a ton of videos like this on YouTube. This is my personal favorite. So that video is a minute long, but it's a great way to start introducing kids to a breathing exercise. It's a great visual and auditory reminder. And then finally, meditation. So there have been some school districts that are actually doing meditation in the education system, because what we are seeing is that just 10 to 40 minutes of meditation, either daily to bi-weekly, can really increase student performance, both emotionally, behaviorally, academically in the classroom. We saw 25% fewer class absences, 38% fewer suspension days for school districts that did this. We saw improved scores on validated attention skills and an 8% reduction in aggressive behavior. 50% fewer rule infractions, so fewer write-ups. Teaching meditation, although it can be tricky, is really impactful in the classroom. Back in 2014, there was a study that was conducted over just almost 2,000 students from all around the world that found that meditation improved their mental well-being, their academic skills, and their social abilities. Students were taught meditation in their schools, and they actually reported better concentration. They felt more self-confident, and they had a more positive outlook on life. Meditation has been shown to promote a stronger self-identity and higher optimism. And a quote from 2017 says that meditation promotes mental and emotional well-being. When you meditate, you focus on the present moment and you declutter your mind. This causes positive changes in your mindset and lifts your mood. When you begin to implement a meditation program, it's really important to identify some necessary behavioral shifts to deal with classroom and school level problems, right? Are there misbehaviors such as truancy and actions leading to suspensions? Are students anxious or suffering from PTSD? What performance goals need improvement? And how can your school culture be improved? And then we move on to prepare an implementation of the program. Buy-in's going to be gradual. It's not going to be everybody, right? But share the positive to help grow that enthusiasm. Have your hype team that's excited about it to help get other people excited. It should be a consensus, so faculty and staff should determine whether or not they want to use this approach, because again, teachers have to implement this, right? It's not going to work if it's not implemented. And we have to train the educators, right? Students also need trainings. And teachers not only teach the technique, but also provide science classes on why this technique works. How does it impact stress? Right? Why is it beneficial to our mind and our body? When students know the why, they're more likely to take it seriously and do the work. It's also important that students have choice, right? They choose how they want to spend meditation. And adjustments need to be made. Right? Consider the school space, consider the schedule. So again, these 2 slides, feel free to pause on this information to jot it down. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about how this gets started in a school building. Here is a quick example of what meditation can look like. Right? Set aside 20 minutes in the class day. Have everybody sit where they want to. Make sure that they're comfortable. Have students close their eyes, take a deep breath, relax the body. Right? And then you begin the meditation, whatever that mantra is, whatever you're saying to yourself, whether that's counting backwards, whether that's a phrase, some positive self-talks. After 20 minutes, you begin to move your fingers and toes. You kind of ease yourself back into the world. You open your eyes, and then you sit until you're ready to move on. Now, in my personal experience, 20 minutes is a long time to meditate for me personally, which means I have to start off small. I start off with 3 minutes and see how that feels. And then when I'm ready, I move on to 5 minutes and then maybe 6 or 7 minutes, right? Meditation is a process. It is not a goal. It will take time to continue to perfect and hone these skills. And then finally, regulation, right? How do we get our kiddos back to the green zone, for example? How do we regulate and how do we teach them how to regulate themselves? When we talk about regulation, it's really important for us to educate our students in the connection that emotions drive behavior. How they're feeling is going to push them towards a behavior. We need to be patient, right? These skills are skills that need to be taught. And when we tell ourselves that they should know better, then they probably don't. We want to set the tone first thing in the morning. We want to have a routine, maybe a warm and welcoming entry task, group oriented. We want to do check-ins. Help your children, your students, understand emotion in real time. How do they debrief in the moment? Right? And some Life Space Crisis Intervention and Kids Connect are 2 great organizations that share and give examples of what this looks like. How to debrief in the moment when they are still frustrated. You want to check in with your students all day long. This gives increased feedback for them too. They start to feel like, oh, how do I feel right before lunch every day? How do I feel right before the bus comes? We want to increase our feelings vocabulary, not just happy, sad, mad, tired. But what are other words that we can increase their vocabulary? I spoke about this earlier, but having a calm down spot in the classroom for students to regulate. And balance the work between emotional regulation and academics. Make sure that there is time for emotional regulation to be taught. Keep learning and keep teaching about social and emotional learning. And recognize that you can share your feelings too. Talk to your class about it. It's really helpful for them to see that the teacher also puts words to what they're feeling, a vocabulary to what they're feeling. Oops. When we talk about self-regulation, this is what we're talking about, right? All of these things are connected to self-regulation. Those mindfulness strategies, when do children need to have some of their own mindfulness practices? Taking breaths, having breaks. What are some ways for students to pause and do a calming activity in the classroom? Think about Go Noodles, think about arts and crafts. Feelings charts are so important. There are ways for students to check in and identify emotions that they are experiencing to support themselves, right? This is how I'm feeling. We just talked about meditation and then reflection. What are guided ways for students to reflect on their emotions and their behaviors in the way that the students want to, right? How can you guide them in this conversation so that they can reflect themselves? One regulation technique is a quiet minute, right? And this is a transition strategy, typically used after large transitions, that allows students to self-monitor and manage their readiness to learn, right? So you take a quiet minute to have voices off, body still, mind focused, belly breathing. And staff do this too. You set a timer to do this. Zones of regulation is a great way to introduce how kids are feeling and what they can do to get themselves into the green zone. Rating how you feel, a temperature check. If you did something like a rating how you feel, you would want to make sure that students know what strategies they have to move themselves back to calm or back to happy. Or you could do this Post-it check-in, right? How are you doing today? And this would be great for older grades, and you could have students privately write a message on that Post-it. So you know the kiddos that put their Post-it on "I'm not doing great," you're going to pick those up and check in on them. Another great self-regulation strategy is this mindfulness jar, right? And so again, this is a way for students to just bring themselves back, ground themselves. There's a lot of different ways that you can implement this, but making them in the classroom is one activity to begin with. So there's a couple different ways that you can implement this. I've used it before, specifically just to calm students. They use that in their calming corner, and they twirl it around, they sit on their desk, and they just are able to ground themselves and focus and just watch it, right? I've used it as a timer before even, right? When children are ready, they shake it up, they put it down, and then they stay in that calming corner until they're ready to transition back to the group. Right? You could ask them a question, you could have them shake it and then set it down, and they think about that question until all the glitter is back on the bottom. So there's a couple different ways that you could use that. All right, so we are going to again pause here for some self-reflection or discussion if you are watching this with a group of people. Thinking of your own students, do you believe that they would benefit from incorporating some of these mindfulness strategies into the day? Right? What are some times in the day that these strategies would work well? Right now, how are you already incorporating some of these strategies? And then where would you like to add to your practice? So again, pause on this slide. I'm going to keep going and then just follow me when you're ready. Finally, the last component of trauma-informed care are building relationships and that connectedness. Teaching kindness, right? Fostering empathy is so important. And we have to start this at a really young age for kids to understand and to build that empathy, build that perception through somebody else's shoes. We'll watch this video on kindness.
The science of kindness. Matter of fact, like most medical antidepressants, kindness stimulates the production of serotonin. Serotonin heals your wounds, calms you down, and makes you happy. The real kicker? Kindness boosts serotonin in the giver, the receiver, and everyone who witnesses it. Every act of kindness also spreads through 3 degrees of separation, and serotonin is just the beginning. You'll also produce more endorphins, the brain's natural painkiller. Endorphins are 3 times more effective than morphine, and they won't land you in jail. And if that's still not quite enough, being kind produces oxytocin in your system. Oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, promotes social bonding, exerts an immediate calming effect, increases trust and generosity, strengthens the immune system, and boosts virility. I guess they weren't joking when they said, being kind is a good thing. To top it all off, compassionate people also have 2 times the amount of DHEA, which slows down aging, and 23% less cortisol, the infamous stress hormone. With so many benefits, every act of kindness is a healthy one. It's a scientific fact.
I think that's a great video to really understand why being kind is effective, right? What's the actual science behind it? How does it increase endorphins, increase serotonin? And kindness in education, right? Benefits can be felt in as little as 2 weeks of kindness in education. We see happier children, increased peer acceptance, improved health, decreased stress, a greater sense of belonging, increased feelings of gratitude, better concentration, reduced bullying, reduced feelings of depression. Kindness can be taught. It is something that students can learn by doing, right? Neuroscience and social science research is clear. Kindness changes the brain by the experience of it. It's an emotion, and empathy is like its cousin. Teachers can foster kindness by teaching empathy and getting our mirror neurons firing through demonstration of kindness towards others. So when we demonstrate kindness towards others, our students get their mirror neurons firing, so they also engage in kindness towards others. Social stories are a great way to teach into kindness. There are a lot of different kindness practices out there, right? A personal gratitude list, defining kindness as a universal expectation, linking kindness to that brain research, like I just said, talking about those mirror neurons, using a job list that actually includes rotating roles for everyone in class, or a list of acts of kindness that students can sign up for, increasing that kindness in the classroom, right? Giving and receiving compliments. This is a great thing to do on Fridays before the school day is out, having all students go around and give a compliment to another student, and engaging in gratitude exercises. I mean, just imagine doing kindness activities with staff in your school building, the type of connection that might grow.
We're going to practice sending kind thoughts. Start by putting your hands over your heart.
Picture someone who makes you very happy. Imagine that person is happy and smiling.
Imagine they are surrounded by calm and peaceful things, and that their heart is calm and peaceful. We're going to send kind thoughts to that person. First, let your heart fill up with kindness.
So full that it's about to burst.
Let the kind thoughts flow from your heart to theirs. May you be healthy and strong.
May you be happy. May you be peaceful.
Now take all that kindness and send the thoughts.
Who did you choose to send kind thoughts to?
To my brother, because I miss him.
I send it to my mom. I always want her to be safe.
How did you feel when you sent those thoughts? Really happy. Feel very joyful that I got to send my dad kind thoughts.
Is there someone you don't get along with?
I don't get along with my brother.
It is my sister. Can you try to send some kind thoughts to him? It's someone that I don't get along with, and there's not a lot of kind thoughts to send.
Feel better.
Like I didn't hate that person anymore.
One of those thoughts were that I hope he feels better, not lonely. Just made me want to send more kind thoughts now.
Again, that's another practice to help increase and train our brain to be kinder, right? So it's a great practice to do with any age kiddos. Here are some references or resources that I referenced today. And Zones of Regulation is amazing, Learning to Breathe, The Mindful Child, Mindfulness Games, right? So all of these are amazing resources for you to go and research and look at to increase and improve your own skills in the classroom. And for your final thoughts today, go ahead and pause on the screen to think about these questions. How does your understanding of trauma, anxiety, and behavior connect to the interactions you have or you have witnessed with students in your school? What current strategies are you using to support the impact of trauma for the students that you serve? What do you want to add? And then how does our understanding of trauma suggest changes in current discipline systems in your school setting? What would that look like to change? What would you want to change? Thank you again so much for participating and for being at this webinar today. Again, for all access to resources from today's session that I have gone over, you can go to my website at www.innovativebehaviors.org. Again, that is www.innovativebehaviors.org. And at the top of the screen, you will see a resources tab or a resources button. Go ahead and click on that and then scroll down on that page and you will see where you can access the resources from today's session. Thank you so much. Please email me if you have any questions. Here are some examples of school meditation programs. And then here are resources that I have referenced today. All right, thank you, everybody. See you next week.